Welcome to the Universal Lens channel, getting to the bottom of all things human-centered design. I'm your host, Chris Kovel. For today's episode, I am in conversation with Kelly Bowker. Kelly is the Director of Design at EverQuote. She has a background in graphic design, a master's in integrated marketing, and an MBA in organizational behavior and technology, and leads a team of designers that are focused on improving the experience of enterprise software for internal and external clients. Kelly has given numerous talks at events such as Tech Circus's Business X Design Conference and UX DX Global Community. She also created and continues to update a really great career resource Google folder, which she made public and which I will link to in the description below. If you find this content engaging and useful, please be sure to hit the subscribe button. And now my dialogue with Kelly. So welcome everybody to the Universal Lens. So today we have a very special guest on the podcast, Kelly Bowker. So Kelly, how's it going?
It's going well. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on. So to begin with, maybe you want to tell the folks listening in a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and kind of how you got to now from a career point of view.
Sure. So I'm right now a director of design at an insurtech company called EverQuote here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I've been working in design for about 20 years, but I did do a couple career pivots along the way. So, I started in traditional graphic design. I wanted to get into publishing and design book covers and make the world a better place because more people would read, because we all judge a book by its cover. It's why we have covers. Otherwise, everything would just be the title. And ended up kind of working a variety of industries, from consumer goods to actually did work in educational publishing, then spent the majority of my early design career as a web designer at Vistaprint before doing a career pivot into kind of brand strategy, and then realized that was not a right fit for me. It was very lonely, lots of writing, more writing than in my grad school. So I did some UX consulting before throwing my hat into product management, where I worked for about 5.5 years before boomeranging back to design. And so definitely very grateful for being back in the design world, because I am most motivated by helping people, mainly other designers, like really get the respect and opportunities to grow themselves. Whereas design is very stereotypical. Like you go to a cocktail party and people ask, like, what do you do? And you're like, oh, I'm a designer. Like, oh, cool. I love this website. I love this app. But that's not design. Like design is experiences, it's services, it's physical goods, digital goods. There's a lot more than just the surface level experiences of what we associate as being a designer. And so I kind of try and leverage some early experiences that I had with an amazing manager to really continue providing that, of showing people there's research, there's strategy, you can go broad or you can go narrow, and there's all these other different paths, but the best way to really figure out which path is right for you, how bumpy that is, how much capacity you have, is just like having that opportunity to begin with. And so that's where I focus right now.
Well, that's great. Thanks for kind of sketching that out for me. You brought up a lot of interesting topics just off the bat. Few I want to kind of pick up on. So firstly, it seems like you have a pretty diverse background, which is great. It seems like you've been doing a lot of different kinds of things within the umbrella term of design. And, I think that kind of positions you well to get to my next question, which is really about defining or conceptualizing design. Because I think, you brought up the cocktail question. I think that's the cocktail party point, which is interesting too. Because I've also struggled, I've been in, the design world, I guess you could say, for close to about almost 10 years. And people will come to my friends and family, and my ex-partner, even I lived with her for 5 years, and she would still kind of say to me I don't even know what, she was a dentist, right? And she would be like, I don't even know what is it that you do? And I would try to explain it by saying, well, I'm in the innovation space, or, it's kind of like engineering, but it's not, or not really an engineer. But for people who are other professionals, for example, engineering or dentistry, or even kind of more newer titles, things like data science and business, business management, this type of thing. It seems like it's a lot more straightforward than what we do in terms of calling ourselves a designer or calling ourselves a UX person. So, with your experience and your background, how do you now, conceptualize UX? Do you see it differently than design? And how has that changed from the beginning of your career to now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been thinking a lot about this on the power of words and the power of labels, and even that whole question of, what do you do? Or more recently, because I have kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And so kind of to start is I'm trying to encourage my partner and my kids' teachers and other things, don't ask them what they want to be when they grow up. That is a limiting question. Instead, ask what kinds of stories do you want to tell? What do you want to be proud of? What do you want to experience? And then you get a much broader answer, because to your point of how, a dentist, an engineer, a business analyst, all these things, they're more straightforward, but I actually don't think they are anymore. Even a firefighter is not straightforward anymore. Very few firefighters actually fight fires. They usually help overdoses and the opioid epidemic, and and other things. They are more trained in human safety.
I thought you were going to say that they helped get kittens out of trees, but okay.
Kittens out of trees. Yeah, exactly. They are a human service provider, safe shelter, all of these things. Because otherwise we'd be hearing about fires all over the place. They still happen, but not to the extent that the name firefighter is. I'm going to go fight fires, and so I think that's what is really important about this idea of I'm a designer, I design things. And it's great. That's the lead in for those cocktail questions. So what do you design? Do you design services? Do you design software? Do you design furniture, fashion, clothes, objects, experiences? Because even thinking about going to a museum, how you move through a museum, more so with science museums and natural history museums and other things that is designed. How you move throughout a space is designed. And this prevalence of we all have access to the visual presentation, the apps, the phones, our TVs, these kind of visual interfaces, that has perpetually led to this expectation that design is mainly that. We don't think about how our lives are designed around our cars, our kitchens. Interior design is also something that's really important, whether it's in your home or in a retail shop or even a restaurant. And so that's the root of design to me that I get most inspired about, is how do people engage, trying really not to consistently say the word interact, because again, we have interaction designers. When I was an undergrad, interaction designers were the people that just made flash animations. It was interactive, not necessarily interaction. And so it's become both harder and easier to explain what I do, or, going into college and people are oh, what are you going to study? It's graphic design. Very easy, understood. Okay, great. You're going to go design print material. You're going to work in newspapers or advertising or things like this. And then as the internet continued to become more and more prevalent in this entire ecosystem, we realized for UX design, for that user experience, that it needed the expertise and the thought of these other industries, of urban design, behavior, psychology, understanding spaces and thresholds and all these other things unintentionally. That impacts our cognitive load, our ability to interact with it. And then the classic graphic design is that, that window dressing that makes something appealing or not, that makes something draw us in or not. If you think about going through a suburbs or even say an amusement park lot, you have like the haunted house right next to, I don't know, like Space Mountain. Those are two very different experiences based on the window dressing, the external styling, even if the internal actual roller coasters or kind of how they move you about the space from a structural foundational perspective are very similar. Disney, I think, does an amazing job and has lots of great case studies on leveraging design for more than just the window dressing, for understanding how do you make going through an hour and a half long line for a 7-minute ride seem like an enjoyable experience. And so, like,
or at least not like miserable.
Exactly. Like, the Tower of Terror, I remember, I think that was like the longest ride that I've ever waited in with my dad. And it was the shortest ride ever. And they have signs of like, you are now 45 minutes away from like this thing or that thing. And it's a 7-second ride.
And I remember too, because I loved that ride as a kid going to Disney. And I think if you might remember this better than I have, but when you're waiting in line and the line could be like over an hour or whatever, you're walking through like graveyards, you're going through the house. It's almost a ride. It's almost a ride before the ride.
Right. Like they're trying to create this build up to the overall experience and other things. Yeah. I went the first year that it opened. So the lines were ridiculously long because it was the big thing that everybody was looking forward to. And even the ride was interesting. And what they advocated for was like no ride was the same, which was true. Like we ended up doing it a couple of times because they had, I think, like 5 or 6 different settings of where it went. Like we're going to bring you all the way to top floor first and then drop you. And then we're going to go to level 3 and then drop you. And then level 5 and then drop you. And like you couldn't, there was some algorithm in terms of like how often they changed, and they had 2 different ones. So really, really just like fascinating case study on time management, the perception of time, and how to, keep people engaged, especially for a place where it's all hot, grumpy children waiting in line that need immediate gratification.
South Florida in the summer is a hard place to make fun sometimes.
Oh my God. Yeah. That I would never do in the summer. I've only ever gone in, New England winter. So spring break, like not spring break, like winter break, like once or twice, but it's still, I think it's become harder for people to understand or not just kind of bundle all different types of design into one because of the prevalence of digital experiences everywhere. And so it's easy to get into that sand trap of, oh, I know what you do. You said you're a designer. Great. You like designed an app, or like you made the visuals, but the people that did the hard job are the engineers. And it's like, no. Sometimes, yes, if it's infrastructure, if it's security, if it's like figuring out all those different touch points, but design is part of that, if just as much, if not more so, because there's this higher need of truly understanding the barriers to entry, the barriers to exit, and the expectations to keep a user, because now we all know like, oh, there's a bajillion options for everything out there.
The analogy I use to distinguish between maybe sometimes the way I like to look at it or explain it, to try to simplify it at least, between design and engineering, because you're right. Like, a lot of times the perception is the engineering is the tough part, and designers, if we're talking specifically about digital experiences, which again, I think you brought up a great point where sometimes I feel like we get pigeonholed as a UX designer or UX researcher that it's all just digital. It's all websites or apps, which is ultimately, in my opinion, not true. I think that it's a bigger, broader spectrum of things that we can design, to your point about experiences and this kind of thing. But I almost look at a designer more, if we're taking the context as saying building a building, right? The designer is more of the architect laying out a kind of blueprint for people to use the building, for people to have, for it to be, architected in a way so that it's easy for people to enter and exit. It's easy for them to, size of rooms, functionality, this kind of thing. Thinking about, yes, of course, like how it can actually be engineering and limitations of the laws of physics and this kind of thing, but really also looking at things from a human-centered point of view. And then then engineers or computer scientists are more of like the construction workers who are actually taking that blueprint and making it tangible and tying it up and getting the pipes together. And
yep. Yeah, they're creating the armature and the frames and, all of those pipelines.
I don't know if the engineers would agree with that, because it does seem like we're a bit relegating them to just, following orders. But I don't know.
It's a mixed bag. My father, he's retired now, but he was an architectural engineer. So he designed the house that my parents currently live in. And he even gave advice to one of their neighbors as their house was being built out to not just think about, how do you want the layouts, the rules of doors because of fire safety and codes and all of these things, but also understanding where do you place your house based on how the sun rises and sets. What rooms do you want cool? What rooms do you not want cool? Like, where does the garage get placed? And so, they were across the street and they ended up flipping where the garage was, because it's like, hey, if you put the garage here, this room is always going to be dark. So you're always going to have electricity running. You're not going to leverage the Western sun and this thing at these times of days. And so it goes back to design and engineering, in my opinion, both from a digital perspective and a physical perspective, are more important than design and product or engineering and product. Product needs to stick closer to like the business side of the resources, the financials, the cost, the cost of goods. Are we still are we still focused on the right user base? Do we want to still provide the correct amount of value to our like VIP customers, so to speak, the ones that have been with us since the beginning, those early adopters, or are we at a pivot point? And there are a couple of articles out there from '08, around the '08 recession, from Harvard Business Review, about like, hey, now is the time to reevaluate your user base, who to market to, why, who to keep, like whether to keep status quo to weather the storm or take this opportunity and fully pivot. And then more recently, Adobe put out an article about what they struggled with of who to build for, like not just focusing on today, but focusing on the future. And I was definitely the customer of Photoshop and Adobe that they had no idea who to market for. I was using Photoshop for photo editing. I was using it for designing websites. I was using it to make GIFs. I was using it to make wireframes. I was using Illustrator to make wireframes and illustrations. I was using InDesign to make like digital magazines and catalogs. Like I was the person that was using their suite of tools in ways that they had never thought of, except Flash, because Flash killed me in undergrad. And I was like, never again. I'm not doing this ever again. I'll use After Effects, but not Flash. And so it's that same kind of thing of whether you're designing physical goods, physical experiences, whether you are like somebody that calls yourself a designer, an engineer, or even like in operations or logistics in some way, you need to think about how people engage with their environment and what kind of environment is it and what kinds of signals are coming.
Yeah. So what I think you're getting at here is, which I totally agree with, is that design is basically everywhere. It's everywhere you look. I mean, I think I haven't read the book yet, but Don Norman recently came out with a new book called Design for a Better World. And the first chapter is called Almost Everything Artificial Has Been Designed. And, I think he just kind of I've read the first chapter, and it's like he just looks out his window and he just starts just naming certain things that he sees. And he basically says, everything I see has been designed. It's intentional. There's a conscious designer, whether it's a stoplight or whether it's power lines, everything around us, right? The modern world basically has been designed. And when you have that, and also another very broad term, so design's a broad term and experience is a very broad term. And when you put those two things together as UX design or experience design, it's hard to really find, it's hard to understand like the boundary conditions in a sense of what's in scope and what's out of scope in terms of what we're doing, right? Which I think adds maybe a little bit to the vagueness of the job title.
Those mental models that we hold in our heads of ourselves and of others are difficult to change. A doctor will always be a doctor. Nurse will always be a nurse. A dentist will always be a dentist. Even your food delivery people, like that doesn't change even with the prevalence of Drizzly and Grubhub and all of these other places. It's about really kind of understanding more the psychology of people, how the ecosystems that we live in, the differences of those ecosystems, and like, where do we want to instill care?
That's the thing about, I think, being a designer as well, is that it does pull from a whole bunch. It's very multidisciplinary, which is something that that kind of drew me into the field, where you do need to have, probably this is a good question for you. Like, do you feel like for younger people who are trying to get into the field and become a designer, who want to grow and get, I guess, more stature, or kind of go up the corporate ladder, or just continue to kind of get better at what they do, like hone their craft, is it more important for you to find something that, like a specialty, and kind of go more vertical with it, more down, and really understand it at a deep level, or think about things more holistically and, like you were saying, like, tie together psychology with a little bit of engineering background, with visual design principles, and even sociology and political science, these kinds of topics, and kind of merge them all together?
I think both options work. The employment environment has definitely changed a lot since I got into it. Since I left undergrad, even when I worked during undergrad, it was still more focused on the tactile skills, because that's our history. That's the factories, that's business. You start at the bottom and you just put your nose to the grindstone, and you show up every day, and you slowly get better and better and better, and you move up. But that's not possible for everybody to do. And so I think it's more important for people to get exposure to a wide range of industries, of different types of roles and functions, different types of specialists, or understanding what kind of companies and industries prefer or need more generalists. I think that we are at this point where I'm starting to see it, and I hope that there's a growing trend of more apprenticeships, because I think my undergrad, it was really, really valuable. A lot of what I use day in, day out, I learned in my undergrad in classic graphic design. But what the stuff that has helped me elevate was on the job work. It was doing field research. It was observing people, from customer service agents to, financial advisors, to people trying to actually use my company's website when I was a web designer at Vistaprint, just like observing them. And that's the thing that I think is starting to get missed, is we have access to kind of do research, to learn about people in very passive ways. I can do heat tracking. I can look at a click, report or a funnel report and all these things, but that's not going to tell you why. It's going to tell you what. And so really up-leveling our observational skills, are being respectfully skeptical of our assumptions, being that annoying toddler, asking why and why and why and why and why is really important. But what you can't just ask why of the world around you, you have to ask why of yourself first. And so building those self-reflective tools, building that accountability of yourself is a never-ending task. And so it's more about trying to understand where are your own transition points in your life. There's nice, clear ones. You finish high school, most people, at least nowadays, because it's harder to get a job unless you have a college education. So like you finish high school, you go to college, you finish college, you get a job, or if you're in an industry, like medicine or becoming a lawyer, sometimes you go straight into grad school. You finish grad school, you get a job, you get an apprenticeship, you get an internship. Like you start at the bottom and you work your way up. But there's this perception or this unconscious expectation that you are going to progress at that same clip that you progressed in your education. And that's not the case. I am constantly baffled by these people that are like, I've been working for 3 years. Why am I not a senior designer yet? It's like, because you've been working for 3 years. I helped lead a panel for Tech Circus Business by Design track. And one of the designers that was on the panel, Karen, he works for a company called Axiom that's all focused on public service. So building software for ambulances, for like the 911 call centers, for the laptops that live in a cop car, like all of these kinds of experiences. And he shared it took him 3 years to fully understand his users. 3 years in one job. Where like the software is slightly different, but all needs to talk to each other. That's the thing that I think like people forget, because we have access to information at the touch of a button, is true knowledge takes time, and we are all very, very impatient, myself included. I wanted to be a roller coaster designer when I was like 12, and then I realized, oh, you need a specialty in physics and engineering, and amusement parks aren't built all that often. I'm going to go the opposite end. And I went into graphic design because I wanted immediate gratification with what I created.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and this is maybe a topic that we'll hopefully try to touch in this conversation, which is about how you think, design and UX design, how you think, because it is relatively a new field. I mean, I know design has been around for a while, but I think because it's a relatively new field, there aren't real true ways to advance yourself, or at least there's not just one track. There seems to be many different tracks, and and in my experience too, I've worked for a bunch of different pretty large companies, and to always, in my mind, I'm always trying to compare design with more mature, I guess, professions, like, for example, lawyers and doctors, this kind of thing. And it does seem like if you're a lawyer, there's more of a traditional path where you go and you get your degree, you maybe go to a big city. After 10 years or so, you make partner. And if you don't make partner, you go somewhere. There's a lot of these tracks that are kind of broken out for you. And you have a lot of people who are older, who have gone through, who you can kind of get that mentorship from. And it does seem like design is a little bit different from those. You brought up a really good point too, I think, about mentorship and apprenticeship, because that is a word that we don't hear very much. It's almost like a medieval term, right? With like blacksmiths and stuff. But it was something that I actually had, and I thought was extremely helpful. And I think if you take a step back and you look at UX and design as a profession, and kind of what I was saying before, which was there are these untraditional ways to get into the field, and there aren't these clear paths forward. So like, you really, as a UX researcher myself, you really can't go to undergrad and get a UX research degree. I mean, there are adjacent fields, but there really isn't many programs that just focus and specialize on that. Maybe down the road there will be, just because it's so new, but as of right now, there are not. And then you really can't also get a master's or a PhD in UX research if you really wanted to. There might be, I hope I'm not speaking too much out of school, there might be some new programs that have just cropped up, but they're few and far between if they exist at all. And which means that you do have to have, to your point, a lot of learning on the job. I had my first job at a grad school was in New York City at a human factors engineering firm, which was kind of a UX design firm. started by a guy who was an industrial engineer and who started his firm in 1975 and, had done design research for 40 years. And that was great for me because I kind of came in, I was really interested in research, and I didn't really understand how research and design went together at all. And he really showed me how that happened. I was really lucky to get that experience from someone who was so so very knowledgeable and very, experienced. And I sometimes fear for some of the younger people kind of getting into the industry, going to a really large organization, and there may not be the way the team is structured. And this actually, I think, gets us into our next topic that I'd like to talk about. And the way that the team is structured, I don't know if when they come into that environment, if they're being nurtured and they're being mentored, the right way. So for that, moving on to that topic, I mean, I'd love to get your take about, how you've structured your team at the organization that you're at now, that you're directing, and your thoughts around if there are specific kind of UX or design models for structuring teams that are out there that you've used, or is it more other cookie cutter methods, or is it more of custom jobs?
I hate using this, but it depends. And so I think first and foremost, as a hiring manager, you really need to understand where the business is, what the capacity of the business has, what's on the roadmap, what's required, because then that helps you understand what kinds of, and then also like understanding the current makeup of the team. So I have a skills assessment, like Google form that I created for my team specific on design. I've adjusted it for being for product and engineering as well and shared it with my peers within my company. It's leveraged a couple different public ones, and then I've edited it because I edited the actual competencies of design of what's important. And so what's important for me, especially given the smaller size of the team that I lead, is having really strong complementary skill sets. And while I have pushed for the team to be more embedded within the domains instead of kind of that internal agency model where a request is thrown over the wall and you go back and forth during client reviews, and then, some pretty picture gets built at the end, if it gets built, is instead thinking more about, what do I have right now in myself, in my team? What keeps up my leadership at night? Like, what are the things that they are most stressed about? How do they perceive design? How do they perceive engineering? How do they perceive product? Like, really get to the root of, if we all had to align on a lexicon for the functional roles and responsibilities and expectations of the core team members that work together day in, day out to build this software, what would they be? Where would there be overlap? Where would there be gaps? And then if I align that based off of what we're trying to build, where is there existing support based on skills, like existing support? Where are there people interested in growing their skills and have that mental and emotional capacity and energy available to stretch themselves? Because that's really important. You can't just assign somebody, oh, you're going to go lead this project, and then they're like, my partner's about to have a kid, or I just came back from leave, or my parents, I have to put an assistant care, like whether or not they're honest with you. And then understanding, like, what's the budget? What's the cap? We can do consulting. Like, it's its own little design project in itself of figuring out how to build that team. Because, and then if you get leadership that says, oh, we'll just hire junior people, like pay them nothing. It's like, actually, like, I'm happy to hire junior people. I want to provide them that opportunity, that platform, that, jumping off board to really elevate their careers. But you reduce capacity. I'm going to re-say that because you probably heard the ding on my computer. But when you hire a junior person, you're actually reducing the efficiency and capacity of the team, because you can't just be like, oh, go report into this person. No, they need to shadow. Like you need to actually kind of have that apprenticeship model within your company, even if you don't call it an apprenticeship model. Or, when you hire a junior person, you're like, oh, but they did this. They were a front end engineer beforehand. They'll be fine. It's like, we have these expectations because of the celebritism of design, of engineering, of the soapboxes that the successful people have presented. We don't have lots of public showmanship about, I did a career change and I fell flat on my ass, which is what I did. Like, I left a really cushy, solid job where I was respected. I didn't have to do lots of effort and could work on any project because I was bored and I wanted to try something else. And I left and I became a brand strategist, and boy, was it a wake up call. And I was like, this is not at all like the brand strategy work or projects that I did in my grad school. This is not at all like the brand strategy work that I researched on, that I talked about with other people that were existing brand strategists or had done it. And so that's the other thing, is just because a job has the same title as other people that or that you've talked to or that you see do their own public personas does not mean that's the kind of job you're doing, especially in design and product and engineering. Product managers are not the CEO of their product. I will say that and stand by that 100 days, all the time. You are not the CEO of your product unless you're actually starting your own business and are the CEO. And even then, over time, you're not the CEO of the product. It changes, it evolves. And you need to align on the lexicon. You need to align on what are the complementary skills? How do people think? What kinds of roles and functions are there? What are the expectations? What are the overlaps? Who's in charge of the how, the what, the why, the who? Where is it singular? Where is it democratic? Really get into that messy red tape of your org first.
How do you think that you get that right? Because I agree with you that, especially at some of the places I've worked at, some of the people I've been having conversations with, a lot of times, and you're right, there's this diversity of different environments that you can go into depending on who's leading it, depending on how it's structured, depending on the product, the industry, all these variables matter, right? And a UX, for example, in my case, a UX research position at company A is not the same as a UX research position at company B. There's an overlap for sure, but in terms of the things that you're doing, the functions that you're providing, it can be radically different. So how do we all play nice together in terms of the cross-functional relationships that we have, doing this kind of creative work?
Yeah. I should have looked back at some of my old grad school notebooks and case studies, but I've moved a couple times and I couldn't find them. I finished grad school before all the case studies were digital. Everything was still in a printed binder. But this is where, kind of jumping ahead, this is where I found the most value from my MBA was really majoring in organizational behavior. Understanding the politics of companies, understanding, how to manage up, how to manage your manager, how to manage stakeholders, distributed teams before distributed teams were really a thing. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier of understanding different communication styles. And this is where, if you share out the folder that I have publicly available, career resources, I leveraged Julie Zhao's personal operating guide as my kind of foundation. And I created my own and I linked to hers as an example. But even this is where I think everybody actually needs to do their own work and really truly understand themselves as a leader, where they add value, where they don't add value. This is where a lot of designers, I think, get stuck unless they've been freelancers, is acknowledging and accepting the fact that you are a cog, you are a resource, you cost the business money, your time costs money, your outputs, whether they get built or not, cost money. And, we need to stop expecting people to just say yes to our ideas, because we're the lead designer, we're the lead engineer, we're the lead analytics person, like we're the boss, what have you. It's going to happen. You're going to anchor to the highest paid person in the room. And I try and be cognizant of that whenever I'm in a room. But at the same time, like you're working. It goes back to like, you work to live. Just the same reason the business is trying to live. How do they live? Through cash. And so like you are that slow leak of cash, if we like to use the rocket ship analogy for many startups, but like that's the oxygen. But we need to make sure, like, how do we keep getting oxygen? And it's through the business. It's through paying for services, the products that we sell, under keeping costs low, all of these things. And so it's just, people kind of need to be more honest and just accept, hey, I'm a human. I have needs. I need money to fulfill those needs, food, clothing, shelter. Everybody has those. What are the Maslow hierarchy of needs for the business? Do they need an office space? How many people do they need in order to, perpetuate that? And then trying to understand if we want to grow, if we want to create a safety net, a nest egg, or like, what's our exit plan? Hey, actually, we just want to sell. Like, we want to sell, and then the bosses will go buy an island and retire if islands are still for sale on their own. Like, what is your exit strategy? And your exit strategy could just be like, grow new markets, stay stable, or you don't have an exit strategy. It's just like, nope, I want to continue serving these people, this constituent group, what have you. And that helps you better understand what kinds of skills are most important. What's your bankroll? Do you need those higher skilled, higher paid people? Because like, you can run the risk of underpaying your staff. I learned in grad school, there are multiple levels of employment. Unemployed, very easy to understand. You don't have a job. Underemployed, you have one or multiple jobs, but you're not being compensated enough based on what you are doing in those jobs. And compensation could be monetary, very cut and dry. Compensation could be from a values perspective, like you're working in an industry that you don't really feel good about, or you're not feeling respected or in your role, or you're not like seeing the output that you expected based on when you got hired, all of those things. Employed, highs and lows. Sometimes you're overworked, sometimes you're underworked, but most of the time it's pretty even keeled, low stress, what have you. And then overemployed, where you're doing more work than you're compensated for. And, kind of similar to the underemployed thing, but more focused on actual like direct output. And, are you okay with that? And I've had peers when, our economics professor clarified this and said, like, how many of you are okay with being overemployed? And I think like 10% of the room raised their hand. They're like, yeah, I'm fine with that. Like, I'm learning, because they saw that they actually weren't overemployed. They saw that they were getting something from having to travel a lot, from having multiple projects, from like working 60 to 80 hours a week while also going to grad school. Whereas some others were like, nope, like I can't do more than work and go to school and have a family. Like, this isn't. And so that goes back to, the point that I made earlier of our values change, our motivations change, our needs change. And so you kind of need to have these like forced reflection times in your life and in your job to understand, where are you? And this is where I think truly valuable talent teams and HR teams are the most effective, is that they kind of have that accurate pulse on the makeup of the company, the quality of the company, of the employees, like where people feel valued, where they don't feel valued, where they feel heard, where they don't feel heard, in order to like then more effectively engage with the leaders of those domains or those functions, in order to highlight like, hey, you have some star performers, but they're feeling stagnant. What kinds of projects are upcoming? This is another thing of why with my team, I have the benefit of being small, or I'm like, nothing's off the table. If you're getting bored on a project, tell me, like, and if there's a chance that I can switch you, we will switch you. If you have an idea based on some other conversation, like, present it. Like, nothing is off the table. And I got fortunate that I had a manager like that early in my career, where she realized, oh, you think strategically. You're also good at, like, the design skills, but you ask questions and you know how to talk to this person. You know how to talk to that person. You know how to talk across time zones and all of these things. Like, I'm going to go stick you on these projects. To which then I responded, I'm like, but I'm not designing anything. They're like, no, you're the user.
Yeah, it seems like, you know, as you were outlining and detailing ways to think about how to structure and formulate and create teams, you know, design is everywhere, as we've been saying, design teams, you know, you're using a lot of business language, and I think business like knowledge of business that you've gained through school, and I'm sure through probably, you know, independent study, this kind of thing. And that's actually a place that I want to get to eventually, about the value of business training and design, because I feel like the more you progress and the more you think about design strategy, the more business becomes business understanding, business strategy becomes relevant. If not just relevant, it becomes actually dominant, right? So, but before we do that, you know, kind of centering more on teams and team structure, do you feel like there's like a prototypical team in terms of a UX team that, in terms of roles and functions, that you would need? Let's just say we're hypothetically creating a new UX team. A company has buy-in. You know, and they've hired, just say, a head of UX to come in, and there's, you know, 10 or 20 slots that are available to bring people in to kind of start that UX team. Would you say that you would want to focus hiring on designers? Would you want researchers on that team? Would you want any kind of content people coming on? What's that mix in your opinion that we're trying to get to? Obviously, you know, context matters, but just hypothetically.
Right. Yeah. Bearing understanding context and, you know, the importance of the project and their things. I think from my personal experience in large and small companies, with large and small teams and different types of makeups, what I think is actually really important is having a strong principal designer that may or may not be interested in managing, doesn't matter, but that has really solid foundational skills in traditional design, and understanding the hierarchy of information, the hierarchy of page layouts, like the importance of those touch points, you know, understanding that the successful design, more so like within UX, is less about the window dressing. You know, they cringe a little whenever a client says, "Oh, this looks pretty," like, but, you know, understanding the importance of function over form is really important. In addition to, I think a content strategist is key, especially somebody that has a more formal information architecture background, to understand site structure, that can understand content both from like a visual perspective and a language perspective. And then probably a handful of more mid-level designers. And then if somebody has capacity or you can hire another principal designer that's more focused on management, a junior designer to help learn, because one of the best ways to grow is to have to teach somebody else. And so I think that's really important. That's why I think apprenticeships are important. Why like true mentorship is important, not just these like, hey, come join this mentorship website and, you know, get a certificate to put on LinkedIn. Like, no. I've gotten, you know, most of my mentorship has been people that are outside of my industry. That has been the most impactful, because it's about environments, people, you know, the sticky things, the tricky things as well, that you can't really work with. Whereas if you find a mentor that's specific in your industry, you end up just talking about tactical stuff, which there's nothing wrong with that, but you should be talking about that with your team in your company. And if you're not, that's a flag saying, hey, maybe the trust, the psychological safety within your company isn't good if you're just saying yes and doing whatever feedback is coming your way from clients. If I had capacity to hire another specific, I would definitely hire UX researchers. But I'm also of the opinion that everybody needs to participate in research. There should be a team lead, coming up with the study plan, understanding how long it takes, figuring out how to synthesize it. But I want engineers in that research. I want product people. I want analysts. I want all the designers. Because again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. We need more observation. And if you just hire a user researcher or have a team that's just UX research and say oh, here are your assignments, again, kind of like that agency model, people don't actually obtain and absorb the information. It's like doing book reports in elementary school. Do you remember any of the book reports that your classmates presented on? Do you even remember the ones that you did? And so where do we go if that's our work life?
Yeah. You bring up something that I've thought about too before, which is the role of engineering within the design team, right? Because in many times, in many instances in the past, engineering seems to be off in the distance. It's not really brought into the process of designers making prototypes and researchers researching behavior that then gets translated into requirements that designers then prototype, et cetera, et cetera. But in many times I've been on these teams and I've said to myself, thinking about the three circles, right? Viability, right? Can this thing actually be built? And many times I think designers are really good at trying to push towards designs and innovations that will really dazzle and really be an amazing product from a user point of view, because that's kind of what we're good at. That's how we spend our day to day and what we focus on. But there's this question about feasibility that always comes in: is can this thing be built? Do engineers can it get tied up in such a way so that it functions the way that we would like it to function? So I'd like to get your thoughts on how engineering and design work together, because in many cases, at least I've found that there's a segmentation between them, which seems to me to be not a great way of going at it.
I'll look to see if I have this publicly available and I can share it as well. And so it's kind of, a very messy Venn diagram, and it's rough. There's sometimes in some companies where one of the circles is completely out on its own and not touching anything else. But the way that I have it is, there's the Venn diagram, essentially why, how, what, where, when, and who, and design and engineering mainly overlap in the how and the why. I have all of them, all roles, analytics, product, business, marketing, design, engineering, overlap in the who. You really do need to everybody needs to understand the who.
And the who in this case is who your users, correct?
Exactly. And the who sometimes could even be your internal stakeholders, or internal users.
Exactly. Yeah. It doesn't have to be B2C.
Exactly. Yeah. And so design and engineering share ownership and responsibility of the how and the what. So the how are available resources, the technology, the people, the environment, and marketing kind of overlaps a little bit of that, especially if you think about guerrilla marketing or digital ads and other things like that. Is it a digital ad on a train, in a restaurant, all that stuff? And then the what is the experience. And this is, again, is it digital? Is it physical? Is it a service experience? Is it psychological? And I think engineers get a bad rap. And I think they also get stuck in this ridiculous expectation that they can build the world in 7 days. They can't. Just because we have immediate access to technology does not mean it takes very limited time to build it. We all love that phrase of fast, cheap, or good. It's you rarely, can get good when you go fast. And I would love to see the day when we stop calling our kind of work chunks as sprints. It has this unconscious expectation you're going to run 500-meter dash. No, agile is appropriate. We want the cat burglar.
Change it to jogs.
Yeah. Exactly. Hey, where's the couch to 5K version of work? But like agile is fine. Agile makes sense. It's about being nimble and being efficient and being practiced and, having skills and foresight, but also being able to pivot and adjust. Sprints, I want to die. Because it creates stress. You can be really effective at sprints. I love Kanban. Kanban is great because I think it gives people breathing room. And this is where I think engineering gets into like a sand trap of I feel like historically, I've only met a handful of engineers that have been effective at really, truly advocating for their team and their team's capacity. And I'm fortunate to work with a couple of them now, but being transparent and honest, like, yeah, that's feasible, but it's going to take time. And then, really working with their product partners or their analytics leads to having that knowledge of the cost of their team, the cost of delay, the cost of like rushing and trying to do it now. This is where I miss beta releases. Like everything's just MVPs and then the MVPs live forever. And it's like, what happened to the beta? Like what happened to the trial and acknowledging that it's going to be crappy? It's, I don't know. And I like definitely went off on this tangent but I think the world is resting right now on the engineers' shoulders. And they're not getting the respect similar to design that they deserve, what they need. Because as you were saying earlier with like the architectural example, like if the house falls over, all the fingers get pointed to the engineers, not to the architects, even though they're the ones that designed it.
Even though that the blueprint might have been the reason why the thing fell over, the engineers are going to be blamed because they're the ones who actually built it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it takes the marketers to like turn the Leaning Tower of Pisa into a good thing, even though it's on slowly sinking into the earth.
Yeah. How could we spin this?
No. It's not a bug. It's a feature.
Right. Exactly. That's why the marketers get paid the big bucks. But no, I mean, I think the way I look at this is a little like kind of a pet theory of mine. I don't know how much water it holds, but I feel like if you were to rewind maybe 30 years ago, I think the engineers were the ones who were seen as like the rock stars in terms of development. But something has changed over the last 30, 20 years or what have you, where UX and design has become more prevalent. And I feel like engineers, back in 30 years ago, and even before that, would probably do a lot of the things that UX people are now focused on, right? They would, the whole experience would be in engineering. And now what we're trying to do, it seems like how the field of design / engineering is advancing is like, we're making it more specialized, which I think is a good thing. It means that like the stuff that we're building is more efficient. It has a lot of different people focused on a lot of different aspects of it, but engineers are now, it does seem like they're in this new world of design and UX and engineering and product and all that do seem to like that they're almost like the odd, like for me, I've worked in all different types of industries, and engineering is usually not something that's talked about a lot. And I feel like it is an integral part of the development process, not just like, okay, we have some screens, engineers now just go build them. Cause we need to understand the technical limitations of the sandbox that we're playing in. Right.
Right. No, exactly. And it's hard because again, it goes back to like, we expect everything yesterday and we expect it of the highest quality. And that's where I think engineers get the hardest time. I was joking around with a friend and they're like, oh, I kind of miss waterfall. It's like, and it's not necessarily, right, exactly. And it's not necessarily because they missed that process, but it was the waterfall from a project management perspective put a lot more onus on the stuff that UX, especially in research and product, do now. But having it earlier, like really increasing confidence that, yes, we understand how long this project's going to take. We know like how many people we need and what skills. Like it really elevated the project management side of work in order to increase confidence of stakeholders and team leads so that they could deliver within that expected timeline, especially in the world of, you bought software at a computer store. It's no longer this time where, we can just like fix it later in the future. Like we are becoming even lazy in the quality of our stuff because things have become so continuous.
Well, you bring up a good point, one that I haven't actually considered, which is, and I'll maybe run it back and see if you agree with it. But like in waterfall, what you're saying is that like a lot of that upfront planning really has to get nailed down because you got to make sure that it's all kind of together and you're not pivoting as much as you're moving through the process. Whereas when you're working agile, in many cases that planning gets short shrifted because you're like, we'll just course correct, halfway through, because that's the whole point of agile is that you experiment and you learn, you change. But like, yeah, I there's a lot of uncertainty when you're working agile, and that can be not a great place to be sometimes.
No, it's stressful. I think the best, I'm a little biased because I've taken project management classes and I've worked with amazing project managers that I'm just like, holy crap, don't ever leave me, please. Just like, you are a magician. And so what I want people to kind of remember is like all projects are waterfall. Like we're all getting in a boat, starting on a stream, heading towards a path, and like committing to going off the cliff. Where we've adjusted because of the ease of technology, of where if agile is used appropriately, is more of as you're going down that stream, rushing to the cliff or being slowed down or what have you, you're taking in those signals along the way and then making a decision of, no, I'm going to still go. I'm still confident in the plan that I had, that I came up with when I got into the boat, or like, oh, the environment's changing. I'm going to go off to the side and like shelter for a bit out of the water. Or, oh, there's a new path that I was completely not aware of. Do I want to explore it? Can I tell anything from this distance about what's going to happen to me if I take that path? Like, that's how you apply agile effectively. And I do truly think that like we've missed the art of like strong project management, and we've put on too much responsibility to everybody do their own project management. And that in itself is a really hard skill to learn and build that muscle and that habit. I'm very grateful for like continuous integration and delivery and deployment, especially somebody that's had to deal with multiple code freezes and, run the risk of all of that stuff. I think we're in a place where there's a lot of benefits. But I think we're short-sighted, or we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot sometimes because we have this expectation of, we can fix anything. And we forget about the risk of releasing something or not releasing something.
Well, I mean, one of the things that you brought up, and I think it might be the biggest trigger of frustration for me when I'm on teams working, is not having a strong product vision, or not having a strong roadmap in place. To go back to what you were saying about waterfall, like if you're working waterfall, you kind of have to have that strong roadmap in place and understand the life cycle, let's say, of this project, and have some timelines in place and have some goals, and make sure that you understand the goals and where you're going and this kind of thing. And that's always, with the caveat of saying, well, of course we can course correct. And of course, like, as I almost look at what you're proposing, which is this merging of and taking the best parts of Agile and taking the best parts of Waterfall and kind of making this third way of this third path forward, which is like making sure that there's a strong plan in place and making sure that the team is all looking to the same path, so to speak, but having I look at them, what the main role of researchers on Agile teams is to continuously getting feedback about the design and about the needs and this kind of thing, so that those inputs throughout the process can help course correct and help you decrease risk and understand and get things to be less uncertain and this kind of thing. But both parts are really important, having that input throughout the process and being able to course correct, but also having a strong foundation of what we're doing, where we're going, and why, and having that narrative. And when that last part, that narrative of where we're going and why we're doing it, if that's lacking, I feel like it's becomes herding cats, and that's when you get that phrase herding cats, usually it's because people don't have a strong narrative of where they're going and why we're going this way. So.
What I've seen more firsthand when to think about the idea of herding cats, it's more of those are the organizations where there is not clarity or alignment on roles and expectations and follow through and positive incentive and negative incentive. Instead, it's kind of this naive expectation of, oh, we're all adults. We'll all do the right thing. It's no, we're all human. We like to avoid pain.
Oh. Yeah, we're all figured out. You bring in professionals and they'll just kind of figure it out as they go. And I always find those environments to be times when projects fail.
Yeah. I hit this point where I can start listening to podcasts again because my kids aren't as noisy. And so I'm I don't mind having additional noise in my ears. So walk the dog, listen to a podcast. And so I've been listening more to the Diary of a CEO with Steven, and he had an interviewer that talked about how we get ADHD wrong and a couple others. And it's yes, we are humans. We avoid pain. So unless you are in an organization that has really solid onboarding, really solid psychological safety, even if the company's a mess, but you have at least that strong small team that you feel open to, where you can respectfully challenge, hey, are we going down the right path? Or call out, hey, I don't know what I'm supposed to actually be doing.
Yeah, exactly. Such a basic question, what am I actually doing here? Could somebody help me? Could somebody throw me a lifeline, please?
It doesn't matter how well organized your backlog is. If there aren't clear acceptance criteria, if people don't understand, oh, when I'm done with something, I should just share it, or you have those ceremonies in place and you agree as a team to those norms, that requires a lot of time and effort to come to that agreement. And then it requires even more time and effort to build those habits. I'm starting to use more the phrasing of tech health, design health, and instead of tech debt and design debt, because of the unconscious expectations of this is negative versus this is positive. Think about your own body. Are you going to say, oh, I really need to tackle that exercise debt this month. I just, haven't done anything in a while. Or I really need to tackle that vitamin debt. No, it's kind of insane. And so what I think people should try and tackle, to the conversation more of marrying the idea of the really good parts of waterfall project management and agile project management is more and more of us are going to continue to work in software. We're going to continue working in this ethereal space where we interact with a thing, even though it's not a thing. Okay, if you had to make the thing physical and it's just digital, what do you know about it? What do you not know about it? How confident are you in it? If the experience had to be built in a factory thousands of miles away, how would that impact your timeline of your project? If you could, build, test, launch all out of a single building and sell, how would that impact like who you hire, what you hire, all these things? Like once you start using more physical analogies of, you know, we have a filing cabinet, you have a bank account, you have a vault, you have a refrigerator, you have a pantry, you have a shelf, like you have a physical phone, which my kids think is hilarious. They're like, what is this thing? You know, that enables the conceptualization of the successes, the pitfalls, where to speed up, where to slow down, to be smoother and to give you an anchor to converse around. And that's also where like design truly comes in, is like sometimes we create visuals too early, but it's giving everybody that same visual model to anchor their conversation around.
This is where I think, coming from a research point of view or maybe a service design point of view, is where maps come in, and
yes,
where they become so important, where you're mapping current states. Because to your point, in many cases, you're on these teams, and what we're dealing with very intangible, abstract, in many cases, phenomenon. So things like user needs, right? I mean, can you point to a user need? I mean, I can't. It's an abstract psychological concept. And I think that doesn't help in terms of bringing people together. And also we're creating innovations in many cases, or redesigns of new versions of things that exist, but those new versions don't exist. They're intangible. The requirements are intangible. So trying to as you're saying, I think trying to bring things down to earth a little bit more can then help people rally around what we know, what we don't know, and then where we're going. And usually that's a process that either gets skipped or people feel like they know it already. But I feel like what you're saying is totally correct. And it for me, it does bring up the point where when we're starting off projects, I think getting a sense of what we know already and what the current state is through journey maps, through experience maps, through interviews, this kind of thing, and getting the lay of the land and understanding that landscape, seeing the pain that exists, seeing where we want to what we want to correct and what we want to design for and where the problems are, is a crucial first step. And once you start with that kind of strategy, it really does make the rest of the rest of the road to the final MVP, if you want to call it that, it like elucidates that, right? And it may not elucidate all of it. You can't. It's a little bit fuzzy towards the all the way towards the end, but at least the first couple months of where you have to get to, that becomes clear, and then you can kind of make decisions. But that usually gets skipped, and it's not surprising if that part gets skipped, that initial discovery phase. It's not surprising that kind of chaos can ensue if you have all these people trying to talk about intangible things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that's something that I think we forget over time as we work with the same people over and over again. And so, again, there's like another podcast that I've listened to for years and then took a hiatus from, called You Are Not So Smart, which is all about psychology and mental models and unconscious biases and other things. And it's fascinating. And one of his more recent episodes, they shared a fact of like, go into a room and tell everybody, think of a penguin. And you'll have a 12% chance that a room of like 10 people or 20 people, I can't remember the exact number, is actually thinking of the same penguin.
Right. You get all of this variance of how people are interpreting something that seems so simple.
And we are products of our experience. There was a study with kids when I was an undergrad. So like 20 years ago, but still kind of shocking here, of kids in Australia where a man, and this was like for wayfinding, came and showed them a bunch of pictures and showed him, the image of the floppy disk and like, what is this? And they're like, oh, it's the save icon. Like 20 years ago, it was no longer a floppy disk. It was just the save icon. Like we used a physical thing to help communicate an action and activity. And it's become so ubiquitous and so saved that it has lost its connection with with the majority of the population at this point of where it started. Or depending on where you grew up, you ask kids of different class systems and economic stability, what color is a banana? And depending on where you grew up and how financially secure you were, it was brown or it was yellow, or maybe sometimes it was green. And then it's eventually yellow. Like, humans are fascinating. We may be more connected than ever, but we have created chasms of our true understanding of each other's experiences because we unintentionally anchor to our own experiences. And we think that's the majority because we've created these microcosms because of IA and other things. And it's just this constant feedback loop of our own bubble.
We're also very overconfident too about what we feel is right and what we feel is wrong, where everybody wants to be right. Everyone feels like they're right. But then when you actually go and quote unquote, this is why I love the research part of things. When you go out and test things, that can, let's say, clash with some assumptions that you have. I mean, so yeah, I mean, it's a great book on bias, right? Because we always talk about bias, I think, in UX, which is really important. And Thinking Fast and Slow, which is basically a whole 400-page book on all the different kinds of, I mean, it's primarily about all the different kinds of biases that the human mind has, and how we can get things wrong, and how we're bad at statistics, and how we focus on quick snap judgments instead of stopping and actually trying to think about what's real and what's true and what's false, and these kinds of things. And having a group of people all with different kinds of biases trying to design something that is going to ultimately become intangible, right, becomes very difficult, because it's not so much, in my opinion, it's not so much about what I think versus what you think versus what the product designer thinks versus, the business stakeholders there with their background and their opinions. But it's really about trying to understand the environment with which this thing is actually going, and getting those assumptions, clearing away your own assumptions about where this actual design that you're making is going, and starting with the environment. I feel like that is the first real step, and you have to continuously understand that environment and test what you're making with where the thing is going. And when you're doing that, you're trying as hard, I think that what you're trying to do, that process, that method, is trying to eliminate bias and trying to say, okay, well, it's really more about how the people who are going to be using this thing feel, and what they need, and whether they think a banana is red, orange, or green, or yellow.
Yeah, maybe they're colorblind and it's never going to be yellow.
Yeah, it's not really up to me to say that a banana is yellow. It's up to my users to get a sense of how they're perceiving the world, so that however we bring this design to them, that it'll somehow be more seamless, and they'll be able to better. It'll be able to be to function better. So. Okay, cool. So a few other topics that I wanted to get to during this conversation. So one is, I'm really fascinated with your background, especially with the MBA training, because I feel like it is something that we did talk a lot about earlier, in terms of how the business side of things connects to design, and how you've kind of used your skill sets and your knowledge and your background in business, and how that's helped you in your career as a designer. And I'm kind of curious to know also if, you feel like you would recommend, or feel like more designers need to know more business concepts or business understanding, or if you feel like it is healthy to kind of separate them into like one area of expertise versus another area of expertise.
I don't think there's harm to understanding more about business. And I think that's more because of, in hindsight, I wish I learned and understood more about general business, like budget sheets, line items, cost of goods, the value of of things earlier, because I've started my own business when I was in high school, where I like silk screened clothing. I had a tax ID, all of these things. I tried doing freelancing. I have done freelancing. I've tried to start my own business. And so just like thinking back, I constantly devalued myself because I constantly anchored to either just the inherent like anxiety of needing to have a job or like having a paycheck of some kind. It didn't help of, essentially starting my career right when the recession happened, before we truly knew that it was happening back in, the early 2000s. But also, so I think like that in itself is really important. And then, as I said earlier, really understanding that you are a resource, you are a cost to your company or to your client. Like they are paying you and they're not getting any kind of return for a while. Like that gives you power, both mentally of like how to protect yourself, how to ask appropriate questions. So those sides of like understanding just general business mechanics, I think helps everybody. And then from really understanding like, should I get an MBA? Is it important? What kinds of MBAs are there? Where is it valuable? Where is it not valuable? There are more than a handful of my classes from grad school that I have not leveraged in any way possible. But the thing that has actually helped in some capacity is having those three letters next to my name. The network that I got, I also knew like I'm not somebody that could do an online program. That's just not my educational style. I needed to be in class with other people in person. I would move my seat if I had a classmate that just like zoned out and looked online instead of paying attention and I was distracted by their screen. So it's like, again, understanding what kind of student are you? Can you handle an online program? Why do you want the degree? Whether it's, an MBA, computer science, you want to go into UX and like you want to try and go to a boot camp. I think most of the boot camps are absolute garbage. There's all these certificate programs. Like, what are you looking for? Like, be honest, because as I said, having those three little letters gives me a lot of clout without proving anything. What it has proven is that I had the commitment to go through the program and I graduated. I haven't been public about my GPA. I honestly don't even remember what my GPA was, but like I've never been asked to share it in any kind of job interview as a PM or as, a design leader. But it's like, it's given me access to people of different backgrounds, of different experiences, from nonprofits to very large organizations, to insurance, to, medical devices. I had fellow designers getting their MBA as well. I went into getting my MBA initially because I wanted to do a career pivot and actually work in entertainment and start figuring out how do I improve the distribution model of independent and foreign films instead of like the continuous, production and marketing of the same story over and over again. And then I realized, oh, wait, those working hours are crap. Never mind. I'll just be a patron. I'll support independent film and creators and things like that. Instead, just take my money in another way instead of maybe part of it. If I win the lotto, I'll figure it out. But it's kind of, again, going back, like the best way to move forward is like understanding what's your capacity. What are your opportunity costs? Are they monetary or time? And then what's the curriculum? So if you kind of come up and you agree and you're like, nope, I am committed, I do this. What's the curriculum? What's the cost? Is it online? Is it in person? How long does it take? Can you do it part-time? Can you get tuition reimbursement? Like that I did get tuition reimbursement. So I worked at the same time. I applied my education while I was working, which helped solidify a lot of this knowledge. And so that was really the biggest success for me personally, was I didn't have this gap in education and then application. I had education and then immediate application either the next day in my day job or the next week. But like it was that constant machine of I'm getting new information, I'm engaging with other people, I'm hearing their stories and their examples, either through cases or through class discussion. And then I'm trying it out in small bits, because I also had the benefit of having a supportive manager, having a supportive creative director, head of marketing. I had this ecosystem within both of those communities that encouraged trial and error and, learning from the wins and the not so wins.
Yeah. So I think, partly why, at least for me personally, why I find your background interesting and why I've been thinking a lot about the connection between a business understanding and a design understanding is it gets us to, I think, the last maybe two topics that we're going to be talking about, because I think that the understanding of a business and what it's doing and what it wants, and how it's organized, I think matters in terms of these two topics. So the two topics are maturing UX practices, maturing design. So the business, so that's one. And then the other one is thinking more about justifying it. So the business value, and I think that the two are related. So, justifying the business value of UX, justifying the business value of design. Obviously UX and design are growing. Businesses around the world are embedding UX teams, design teams, spending a lot of money on them. So maybe we can start by first getting your take on how you, at a high level, justify or think about UX teams and the work that they do adding to what businesses are up to in the bottom line. Before you were talking about, well, it's really important to think about, cash flow. It's like the oxygen or whatever in the rocket. And in many cases, I think, that part, when you hear people, not everyone, but when you hear a lot of people and what they focus on in terms of why UX is good, and they talk about things like empathy, and they talk about we're the voice of the users and we make people's experiences a lot better, and all that in some senses is true. But, when you look at UX and you're wearing your business hat, it becomes very important to justify the salaries and very important to justify the hiring practices.
Yep.
From a business point of view. So how do you go about thinking about that?
Well, because going back to, I laugh every time that I hear somebody say oh, I looked at a job description. They're we need empathetic people. And it's just roll my eyes. I see my brain. Just be a human.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Listen to people. Yeah. I don't
know. Empathy shouldn't be something that's listed as a skill on your resume. That's trite. But I think the idea of where UX and business are at the crossroads and need to help support each other more is understanding the user and understanding the value of the user. Because then, to that point of the analogy of oxygen in the rocket ship, without the users paying for your service or advocating for you, if in the case of you're a nonprofit or sharing your mission, all these things, you don't get oxygen. So you can't stay alive. You can't stay out in space and continue to explore new worlds and what have you. And so this is where being more straightforward with leadership, with teams on where do we want to go? Where do we want to travel? Who do we need to help get us there? How much cash do we need to get us there? What's that runway is really important. And UX, especially more in the research side and, the idea of human-centered design, it's not necessarily human-centered design. It's more behavioral psychology. It's understanding the catalyst for engagement. I work in insurance. Insurance is very seasonal. It's very catalyst driven. You want to drive a car, you need car insurance. You want to have a house, you don't technically need homeowners insurance. If you bought your house for, cash only, you're going to run a lot of risk. But there's expectations. You have to pay your taxes. Not everybody does. We know this from public news events. But again, it kind of goes back to be a human. be a valuable member of society and be a valuable member of your company. Again, there's nothing wrong with just working to live. But once, like, the earlier that you're kind of able to recognize that's your driving motivation, then you can be more honest when you have conversations about promotions, about salary raises, of other things on both sides of the table. But then it's kind of also like, it is easy to become short-sighted. It is easy to, especially if you're with a company long enough, and then given, kind of public perception and news articles and other things about businesses, that did nefarious stuff. Like if you think of Enron all those years ago, like it's easy to get into that trap. And I think this is actually part of why there's that number of, I think it's like 32% of businesses that are led by design are more successful than businesses that don't have design. And I think it's kind of more where that unexpected conscience, as long as you have a strong design team that actually has an honest voice and is heard, and not just, a talking head or somebody that's just sitting at the table watching other people eat. But if you actually have a designer that's constantly reminding people or being respectfully skeptical, I mean, like, are you sure that this is what you want? Or, hey, our field studies showed this, and this is the catalyst, or we did this research, and all of these things, like, this is the market. They're kind of more of your compass, not your leader. Like, it's still, at the end of the day, the business is in charge. Like, it doesn't even matter if, in the case of like Airbnb, if the CEO is a designer, they're still making decisions based on money.
Yeah. I almost see sometimes design as like a mini like CIA agency. So it's all about like intel, right? So you're trying to be like agents going out and understanding things about your customers that maybe the C-suite that can't know, right? Because they have other things to worry about, but you're kind of bringing together a story that hopefully, maybe doesn't always, but hopefully will impact the product strategy and this kind of thing. So
exactly. I know we should all be detectives.
Yeah, that would be fun. I'd wear the jacket and the hat and everything.
Oh my God, that would be amazing. Have a fedora.
Yeah, exactly.
Look
Dick Tracy.
blinds.
Yeah. All right, cool. So for the last topic I want to get your take on is, and I think this is a big one that I hear. Again, I'm also big into podcasts, and when you listen, LinkedIn, socials, this kind of thing. I'm not huge on social media either, but I do follow some interesting people on LinkedIn, and you hear a lot of kind of thought leaders in the industry talking about maturity. So, like, just kind of quickly to close off, do you feel like there's like a crisis in from a maturity point of view in UX and design? Is it something that, as you move through your career, and especially when you get to positions of seniority and when you put in a lot of time and get a lot of experience under your belt, is it something that you feel like these more, senior people in design should be focused more on in terms of trying to mature out a design practice? Or do you feel like the profession right now is in a pretty fine, is pretty healthy?
I think we're in an identity crisis, and we're all infighting.
So say more. Yeah, say more about that, because I'm very interested in what you mean.
So I think it comes back to, especially some stuff, if like you see my comments and engagement on LinkedIn, especially on the idea of like, I want the title product designer to go away. Product design is industrial design. Like your UX designers, your graphic designers, your product designers, or industrial designers, fashion designers, all these things. Like, and product management, I think, can still stay as a title, because it is still very much like you're either physical product or your digital products. And so, bring back the adjective digital designer if you need something a little bit broader. And so, where I think from a maturity perspective, like UX has been going on since service design. Like, that's in a nutshell what we are. We've just evolved because people didn't really know how to describe digital experiences. And then, where we elevated in that adoption, that understanding, was when we replaced the word digital with user experiences, because it helped increase the mental understanding of, oh, there's a person interacting with this. And that's where I think the importance of user experience is still really, really necessary, because a digital experience doesn't need to be interacted with. That could be the digital menu at a restaurant. Like, I don't know why they're digital menus instead of paper menus, but what have you. And so if I think about, like, you know, what Nielsen Norman has posted multiple times and other people have talked about, of like the 6 levels of maturity, it's like absent, you know, it's just not there, or it's ignored, it's kind of placated to. There's limited, emergent, structured, integrated, and then user driven. And I do actually think that unless you're a brand new company that just doesn't have capacity to truly hire SMEs within user experience space, most companies are in that middle space. I think trying to get to what Nielsen had espoused to is the top level of like user-driven UX maturity it's kind of a pipe dream.
Well, I mean, the way I look at it is I think to get ultimately to that promised land, or you know, I don't know if you can ever achieve, you know, it's a moving target, right? But I feel like it to cross a certain threshold, and I don't know if it's 4 to 5 or 5 to 6, it may be somewhere in that threshold, but like you're going to have to start to restructure the whole organization around design. And I don't know if a lot of organizations are going to want to go go all in.
No, and I don't think that's healthy I don't even think that's healthy for Airbnb or even ad agencies, because like it is so easy to get like down that rabbit hole of, you know, I think this is where I think designers are really good, and like one of our strengths, but also like one of our kind of our weaknesses is we see the connections between everything. And so we just keep exploring and exploring and exploring. And so that's where you need your peers, you need the business and of like, no, this is our deadline. This is our cash flow. Like, this is the press release. This is the thing we need to get out to. This is, again, why I think it's so important to use that analogy, that thought experience of if this was a physical thing, like, what's its lifespan? How does it get created? What are the materials? Is it recyclable? Is it not? Like, how long does it live in the world? What are the success metrics? How does it fail? What are all of that stuff? And so I think Nielsen's kind of like UX stages of maturity, I think we need to kind of remove that idea or that qualifier of UX maturity. And it's more about team makeup or business alignment. It's not UX. It's, you know, what are your business norms? What are your team norms? If you asked anybody in the company, what's our vision? Can they answer it? Can they not? Like, that's getting to that top level of maturity. You know, to your earlier point of at the beginning of saying, in your experience, and I'm sure lots of other people have worked at companies where they don't have a product mission or vision, or they do, but it keeps changing, or they don't understand the terms and all these things. And
it's like a free for all sometimes, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's where you then fall into this trap of leadership expecting, oh, well, we're all humans, we're all adults, like, you should know what you do. And it's like, if people aren't actually anchored around and understand what you're trying to go to, where your mission is. And that's where I think Airbnb is doing it right, where they have all that like singular point. When I was at Liberty, it was the same thing of like, here's our mission, here's our vision. Everybody work to that singular goalpost, but do it within the confines of like your vertical, your domain, your knowledge space, just like singular goalpost. And that's hard to commit to and stand by, because we, again, like the trap of agile, like, no, you can go anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, I think it also requires strong leadership, and
Yes.
it also requires a bit of risk taking, because I think a lot of people, politics matters, and you have a lot of people who are trying to not make strong choices about things because, it's a bad incentive, because if they make a strong choice and it doesn't work out, they can get pinned. Like, it goes back to what you were saying about engineers getting blamed for when the tower is leaning or something. People don't want to get blamed for the wrong choices, so they keep things, I think, almost intent, maybe not consciously, but unconsciously vague.
Right. Humans hate pain. All things hate pain.
Yeah. Life hates pain, right?
Right. Like, no, I'm gonna if nobody tells me exactly what I have to do, I'm gonna do the thing that I enjoy most or that causes me the least amount of discomfort. And that will continually enable me to get paid or fed or what have you. We'd all be hedonists if we could.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting point you make too, because one I actually haven't heard about in terms of like maturity levels within organizations, because I think you're right. I think that like there's one stage, if we want to look at it more like not on a spectrum, but different, like categorically, like it's first off is getting the UX team or the design team at least on the same footing as other verticals, for example, like market, like being taken seriously, like marketing or sales or something like that. But then there's a step that I've heard, like we haven't released this episode, but we had a few weeks ago on a guy named Joe Boston, who is a product director for a SaaS tool in Dubai, and he had a whole presentation and I guess theory around transforming businesses so that they're design led, or transforming businesses so that they're product led and product design led. Or I know you don't like that term, but I guess digital design, let's call it, design led, right? And that requires a whole kind of reformulation of the business strategy and really how research and design drive what it is that businesses are up to, instead of the other way around. And that may not be feasible to what you're saying. That may not be an actual goal that we as designers or we as a design function within businesses actually want to get to, is what you're saying, which is kind of an interesting point, because I hear a lot of people wanting it to be the way that we mature is that the business gets transformed, but that may not be an attainable goal.
Yeah. Yeah. Because again, I think it kind of comes to just marketing or presentation, the celebritism of design. Like, Steve Jobs was not a designer, but he understood humans. Like, Apple was the first one to have a GUI. He knew that in order to increase adoption, he needed something that lowered the cognitive load. And so what lowered the cognitive load? A familiarity of your physical space. Why do we call a desktop a desktop? Because it simulates the physical desktop. Like, here's your calendar. Here's the spot for your Rolodex. For those that don't know what a Rolodex is, it's your contact list.
Why the trash can looks like a trash can.
The trash can is still like a wire illustration. So, that's what, like, when I hear people say we want design-led organizations, they help increase sales, they help increase adoption. It's not because it's pretty. It's not because it's visually appealing, because we have to remember there are plenty of people on this planet that can't see or have limited visibility or limited hearing and other things. Like, accessibility is really, really important to me. And so it's design-led companies are successful because they are the doors in the decision-making process of, are you sure you want to continue? I have this information. Like, do you want to go back or do you want to choose a different door? We are those people waving the flags to kind of highlight, this is how people make decisions. When something's visually pleasing and the people can interact with that, it lowers the barrier of skepticism. It creates something that is friendly, that is recognizable. It leverages those mental shortcuts that we have built up throughout decades of our lives. And it increases adoption. And the more familiar something is, the more comfortable it is, the more effort is needed to escape that exit velocity. And so, like, exit velocity is what a rocket ship needs to get off of planet Earth. And so, that's why branding is so important. That's why loyalty is so important. It doesn't, a lot of times, like, it doesn't matter if a product or experience is better, cheaper, faster, what have you. Lots of people talk about barrier to entries. Very few people talk about barrier to exit. And it's becoming more frequent. Like, the barrier to exit is getting lower as people become more price conscious, as more things change, as the access to information becomes more frequent, but it still requires time and effort to do that work. And then with newer products, it's like, okay, they've found me. I've hit their price point, their needs, their feature set, all of this stuff. But that's where then, like, the customer reviews and the skepticism of, like, is this company going to stay around, and I think that's why you still see really high barriers to exit for those more established companies. Like, the product, the service, the value really needs to go above and beyond and not degrade in order for you to acquire and keep that new user. That's why I really like the Cano model as a framework to understand and evaluate, because it's functionality and satisfaction.
Well, Kelly, on that note, I'll let you have the last word. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time today. We had a great discussion and definitely a lot to think on. So really appreciate it.